I watched a video the other day, and it was pre-election decision, where he goes, I try to stay out of politics. OJ don't really do politics. That ain't really my thing. But I will say this: whoever is elected the president has to commit to being the president. And we were like, I'm sitting there like, OJ, that's not the issue at hand. Neither one of them is like, I don't want the job.
You can't just be halfway in or halfway out. You have, because being a running back, let me tell you about the Dallas Cowboys.
The government growing babies, microchips in your anus. All koala bears are racist. The ozone layer owes me money. Martians invented turkey stuffing. Y'all can't tell me nothing.
Yep, there it is. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another phenomenal episode of My Mama Told Me, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of black conspiracy theories, and we finally work to prove that Clarence Thomas put his pubes on every can of Coca-Cola. Anita Hill was just the first person to notice. The man loved pubes on Coke. The fact that she caught one, that was just on you, Anita. You shouldn't have been looking down and drinking Coke. It's just facts. These are the facts, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Langston Kerman. I'm happy to be here as always. We have a phenomenal show for you. My guest today, I'm so excited that he's here. He's so funny. You guys know him from his Patreon, /Shaun Diston on Patreon. I'm giving his name away before I've even introduced the man. He also has an amazing, hilarious podcast that I love very much. It's called We Have to Stop Talking TMNT on CBB. It's hilarious. It talks about the Ninja Turtles. I'm a big fan. Give it up for my guest, Mr. Shaun Diston, everybody.
Yo, Langston. I am so excited to be here. I'm so excited to talk about what we're going to talk about, because you were like, what do you want to talk about on the podcast? And I was kind of like, man, I'm drawing a blank a little bit. And when you sort of offered up this topic, I realized how much this was a part of my life. I just am so excited to talk about it.
This is the energy that I love because your topic, I think, is one that certainly people have, it's been in the lexicon, the American conversation for a long time, but I don't think people ever get tired of it. It's never going to get old.
Trial of the century.
Like, they say.
That is something.
You said, and I want to make sure that we get this right for our listeners so everybody feels comfortable and landed in all of this, but you said, my mama told me
OJ didn't kill those people.
Now, I do not want to attribute my mom to that specifically because I don't remember specifically what her take was. I do remember everybody kind of being very happy and chill about it. Like, no one was mad. I mean, I know if you remember, like, I was in middle school at the time, and, like, you know, when the verdict came down, like, what you heard was true. There was a straight up Pavlovian response that all white people were just like, what the fuck? And every black person was like, it was like, we finally got away with one. Like, even if you thought OJ did it, you were like, we can beat the system too every once in a while, which was its own win. It was a very strange time.
I think, and yes, you're making some wonderful points that I totally agree with. One of the things that always, or has bugged me about some of the portrayals in, like, the documentary and, like, the television show is that it's a bunch of black people being like, yes, finally, go OJ, go. And that wasn't as much the vibe, at least in my house, where it was like, all right, shine on, nigga. Go crazy. I don't know.
It was like, okay. It wasn't really celebrating. Like, I think they definitely, I'm reminding you, like, we were in middle school, so everyone was really dumb. We were like little kids responding to, like, we didn't even really know how to respond, you know? But I don't remember adults being like, I don't remember my dad picking me up from school and being like, yo, this black person got away with murder. Like, I don't think.
It's a big day,
yeah,
Shaun.
It's a big day. Let's go get some ice cream or some shit. It wasn't like that at all. But it was a weird time, and I don't remember my family ever really wanting to say he did it. But I can't really even remember, because the OJ trial specifically for me was more intent. Like, first of all, I was in middle school. You just had it, like, was something you followed when you were a kid. But then in high school, I went to this magnet high school in Florida called Coral Reef Senior High School. Shout
Great.
out to
I love that name.
It's
That's
a very
perfect.
strange, stupid name. But
every other high school names themselves after like a famous person. You were like,
we were like
Coral Reef,
I guess. Like, we don't have to like ask anyone for permission. But it was a magnet school, so I went into criminal justice, the magnet, and because of that, like, I had a couple electives that were basically just like training you to be either a cop or a lawyer. But in the first couple years, you just took these general classes, and in one of the classes, one of the assignments was we watched the entire OJ trial.
Wow.
Over a series of months. We watched
I was going to say, that had to take a long time.
It took a long time, and we watched, I think we might have skipped some parts of it, but we watched like months worth of this trial. And did different assignments on every part about it, and just talked about procedure and talked about all this shit. But like, we were also like watching it like it was a TV show in class, and we were like picking sides, and like some of us started to be like, yo, Johnny Cochran's right. Like, where do I stand on this conspiracy?
Yes, please. That was the question that I was building towards.
Where do I
But I love that
stand
you're getting right to it. Where do you stand now? How are you feeling about OJ's innocence in relation to specifically murder?
There's a complicated answer to that. Do I believe he should have been not guilty after that trial? Yes. I absolutely agree with the outcome of the trial. If you watch it, you kind of are seeing lawyers pick apart a prosecution in a way they weren't ready for. You see the ineptitude of the LAPD. Is he innocent? I do not think so. I think he is a part of it. And I think the biggest conspiracy that I do believe is, and I even put up the Zoom background here for you.
I see it. I know what this is.
I think Jason did it. Jason is OJ Simpson's son from his first marriage. And when you dig into that conspiracy, and then and then having also watched the trial and seen how, like, if OJ walked into this house and killed two people, the physical evidence should be overwhelming.
Yeah.
But they could barely prove it. And they had some very circumstantial evidence, and it really clouds the OJ angle. But then when you hear some of the like really outstanding circumstantial evidence for Jason, you're just like, give me more physical evidence. I want them to test his DNA against, like, I want all of it, you know?
I will say that the Jason Simpson journey of it all, or theory of it all, is one that, like, when I first heard it, I was like, I don't know, this just seems like somebody reaching. And then you really unpack everything that they have on Jason, or at least potentially on Jason. And if nothing else, to your point, it makes you have to go, okay, well, we don't know for sure that OJ did this.
And let me just say this too, because I've done a lot of, like, you know, I'm like a comedy performer, so I've done like a lot of OJ. I've done a lot of like playing around in this space comedically. And I want to just say, like, I even stopped doing the character after a while because I was like, man, two people were murdered here. Like, this is kind of fucked up to be dancing around and like being OJ and having fun with it. But
sure.
So just disclaimer, like, it was a horrific crime. And I do think that, like, it is a shame that it is not solved and there isn't justice for the Goldman family and the Brown family. Like, I do think that there's some fucked up shit there, but ultimately I think Jason probably did it. I think OJ probably tried to helped him cover it up. Hence the drops in the Bronco, hence the tiny bits of evidence that you can tie OJ to, and some of his peculiar behavior, including the Bronco with AC with you know, whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's where I'm sort of landed on it. And I'm like, that doesn't make him not guilty, you know?
Well, number one, you got to a very important thing, that this was, in fact, the murder of two people.
It's awful.
And is not, it ain't that funny, but it's still a comedy podcast.
Yeah.
And so we'll figure out a way to make this okay. But I will say that I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure, and I use that in a very loose way, because I similarly thought, like, for a while, like, oh, I'll have some fun in this kind of thing. But my wife and I listened to If I Did It. We like downloaded the audiobook of If I Did It, the OJ semi-confessional.
The book, right.
And one of the things, I thought this is going to be hilarious. This is just going to be a dumb man making a bunch of missteps as a writer. But the thing that I didn't realize is that because the family only won a civil case and lost the criminal case, they were never actually really paid, right? OJ claimed broke. He couldn't pay them for basically what he was, what he was meant to owe them in court. And the only way that they could actually get the money back was to buy the rights or basically retain the rights of the book. And with that, there's a 1 hour prelude when you listen to the book of just like Ron Goldman's sister basically crying on the microphone, saying how this book not only has ruined their life in that it's the only way that they can collect money, but then number two, everybody shames them for having the rights to the book and basically trying to make money off the death of their son.
That is so crazy. That is, I mean, look, that is so sad. And I think it's funny though to be cursed by like this book that is selling like they are. And it's like I didn't listen to the book, but from what I can gather or from what I've heard, he like describes a whole night that like where it happens, and he's like, this is what would have happened or whatever. And doesn't he do like a TV interview where he also talks a lot about it?
He does. He did an interview with Soledad O'Brien where he basically sat down with her and did a live reading. It's not a reading, but a live acting out of the book. And in it, he basically creates this character named Charlie, who he claims is this person who he doesn't know very well and he doesn't have much of a relationship with. He doesn't know anything about Charlie, but Charlie is the one that basically commits the crime, and OJ is sort of his assistant, if you will, throughout this process.
I mean, look, that's more, to me, that is more evidence of this, Jason. Like, because I honestly believe that the only person that OJ would cover for or would like act that way after the trial is either himself or a close family member. Like, it would just have to be.
He has proven himself in every facet of his life to be a complete like megalomaniac type person.
Right.
But he's not necessarily somebody that we're seeing being shitty to his kids, at least in a direct way, other than allowing his ex-wife to get murdered and leave them without a mother. But
here's the thing. We should all like, because I don't know if people know the Jason evidence. Like, we should just go through some of it.
And we're going to unpack that.
Okay, we'll
get there. We're going to get into the research. Okay. Let's stay in the emotional truth here. We'll get into Jason.
Okay,
Jason is not going missed here.
Okay. Well, then, look, and then the other parts of it that are, I think, almost not disputed at this point is the conspiracy of the LAPD. Like, regardless of OJ's guilt on the murder, regardless of his involvement, the LAPD did some very shady shit.
100%.
Like,
I've been watching, I don't know if you watch it at all. I watch a shit ton of Unsolved Mysteries. And it's, Netflix
there's some new ones, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there's brand new ones out. There's second season on Netflix. And almost every single episode, the major thing that you walk away with is the police are bad at their jobs. Sometimes they're bad at their jobs because they're racist. Sometimes they're bad at their jobs because they don't do good detective work. Sometimes they're bad at their job because they do great detective work and then just lose evidence.
Damn,
but one
Langston,
way or the other,
it's interesting because it kind of sounds like we should just maybe defund the I don't know. Like, why are we giving? I don't know. This is interesting.
I don't know, Shaun. It sounds like you're taking things too far.
I don't want to. That's not a bad, that's a bad slogan.
What could we possibly do without the police?
What would we do with the money?
What
would we do with the money and not give to the police?
It's always a fascinating journey when you start to look at the work that the police are doing that basically is working against whatever they're trying to prove. And I think, to your point, the OJ trial is a perfect example of that. Of police just not only being like fumbly idiots, but also intentionally violent against, the person that they're essentially trying to prove guilty.
I am from Miami, Florida. So like I have been around cops, like, the show Cops, remember that? Like, they would shoot tons of episodes in like neighborhoods that I was just hanging out in. Like, it was a very heavy cop, and you got fucked with by the cops all the time. And you start to realize that like they're driven by numbers, which is a really fucked up thing. But like they want to close cases. They want to put people in jail. Like, it is to their benefit to make someone guilty. So they'll plant drugs on somebody. And in their head, they're not doing it to an innocent person.
Right.
Like, I think they think OJ did it, but they were like, we got to actually make this a slam dunk.
And I think that's the violence, right? Is that like the reality of our system isn't, they're unable to remove their own bias from this. And so like ultimately you're just asking a bunch of people who have a very hard form of opinion about a person or about a crime to like be neutral on some shit, and they can't. These motherfuckers aren't skilled in that way.
And then not to mention the Mark Furman of it all in this trial. Like, I think if people don't know about this trial, I do think watching that show, The People versus OJ Simpson, does a really good job of at least laying out a lot of the evidence that is true, that you'd be like, I did not think that could be true.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that he had these tapes where he was talking about framing black people, like, it is so crazy. Like,
but even crazier is a police department who then still puts this person on the biggest case of the century.
It's insane.
Like, there's got to be a level of accountability on their end where they're like, all right, he's racist, but we're not gonna put him in charge.
Let's see, there's a murder of a white woman. Let's go send old racist Mark Furman. I mean, he must have been like closest in the area. Like, who knows what it was? But like, to me, the deadlock on, it must have been OJ by the cops. Whether it is racist or whether it is just them looking at what the least common denominator is, like what the easiest answer is. Oh, she has an abusive husband. He is there. Oh, he's like, he was in Chicago. Like, what is all this behavior? Like, very easy to be like, yo, OJ did it. Why are we putting any effort into anyone else?
And I think you're also tapping into a really important point here that is worth noting for our listeners, is that I don't think, and I'm certainly not hearing it on your end, neither of us is defending the quality of OJ as a human being.
No.
I don't think that like this was...
OJ's a trash, like, part of the
bad
whole
man.
thing. What's really fucked up is, so again, I'm from Miami, and directly after the trial, his family lived in Miami. Like, they lived in the area. And his kids were notorious little bad kids. Like,
oh shit.
Not like Jason might have been older and like wasn't a part of it, but like the kids who were like in the private schools and shit, like they were probably like, the rumors were they were like selling illegal cable boxes and they were like selling drugs because they didn't have money because like their dad was broke, like, so like there was a lot of evil shit going on. And then like, OJ had that like really fucked up incident where he like assaulted the guy in a car in Miami where he like pulled his glasses off. Like, I think OJ, and to that end, like when you watch documentaries about him, you're like, yes, I do think he probably had has CTE, and probably like has rage issues and probably is abusive. And maybe that's where Jason learned it. You know what I mean? Like,
and that 100%. This is at best, this is a learned behavior that he adopted from a very mean man with a very unhealthy relationship with his ex-wife.
He's probably seen his OJ Simpson be fucked up with multiple women throughout his childhood. He has his own like mental shit that he's dealing with. I do think that like OJ is guilty of this murder.
Yep.
Did he commit the murder? I don't quite know.
Yeah.
I lean towards no.
Yeah. One of the things I remember as a kid, and maybe you remember this, and you were in Florida, so it probably was like much more of a conversation for you all. But like immediately after the trial, like one of the first videos they showed of OJ was him like golfing in Florida, and he had like a new young white girl that he was like dating, who looked a lot like Nicole, and the news was making all kinds of big deals about it. And I remember specifically that the women, especially in my life, that was the point where they were like, nah, that motherfucker did it.
No, I mean, I will say that there is an element in the black community of like, that's what happens when you date a white. Like, I think there was a bit of that where it was like, he's gonna, that is not a healthy dynamic. Like,
nope.
And it's interesting because, like, I don't know, like, I don't want to say that, like, that has anything to do with it, but, like, he has this strange ownership issue. He had this weird, like, OJ wanted to be white. Like, he was a person who was like, I don't want to talk about race. I don't want to talk about politics. So, like, there's a weirdness there and like, a weird self-hate there.
And I think, if I may, I think part of it is not just wanting to be white, but wanting to be powerful out in the world and equating whiteness with power. So for him, it's like, what is the most powerful person? A white man. I will elevate myself to whatever that is.
He should have just Sammy Sosa. He should have just lightened his skin.
Get some blue contacts.
OJ should have just lightened his skin. I don't know why you had to go through all this bullshit.
I would love that. If OJ would have lightened his skin.
And then we would have not been talking about it. It would have been fine. He would have gotten off and everyone would have been like, he probably didn't do it. Like,
I still would have loved if he lightened his skin and still tried to steal his memorabilia back. I want him to still go to jail.
That is another thing. That's another
possible.
Conspiracy. That is another conspiracy. Because there is the conspiracy that was a setup to put him in jail because he should be in jail. Like, it was like a retaliation for what he did. And there was like, it was almost like a sting operation to just like get him arrested. So,
that justice was justice, quote unquote, was not originally served, but we'll get him for this much more minor crime and turn it into what ultimately looked like a murder level of
prison
like
sentence.
Punishment.
Like, it was crazy. But
he
the chapters in this man's life, there's so many. Like, we were
so
even
many.
just talking about like the Miami years. Like, there's the Miami years before and after the civil trial. Like, there is like this before the civil trial where like OJ was like, he was like the king of Miami. Like, it was very funny when he showed up because it was just like, yo, I'm OJ. I'm the most famous person in the world because I got off with this murder, and I'm now gonna join a golf club.
I've long said this, and it's problematic at best, but OJ is by far the funniest murderer of all time. Pound for pound. That's a silly motherfucker.
If you watch his Twitter right now, like, I don't know if he knows how funny it is, but that shit is funny as hell.
I think he has no clue, which is what makes it so wild.
His Twitter is just like, all right, well, now I want to talk about what's going on with the Dallas Cowboys. Now, as a football player, like, he would just talk for like 4 minutes about one specific. All right, now, OJ fans, now. This election is really crazy, but we have to come together. All right, now, OJ out. It's like, what the fuck are you doing?
Oh, we're going to take a break. We'll be back with more Shaun Diston and more My Mama Told Me. And we are back.
How is my man supposed to schmeat his meat with this shit, bro? What the fuck?
Yeah, we're back here with more Shaun Diston, more My Mama Told Me. We're still talking about OJ, if he did it, why he did it, and who else might have done it in this terrible, terrible murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. This will be a fun way into the research, but we were talking about how silly OJ is, and one of the things that he talks about in If I Did It is how much of a karate expert Ron Goldman is.
Yes.
I don't know. He says Ron Goldman immediately goes into karate fighting, and it was
it's funny because
hilarious.
I read
describe.
Somewhere that he was a second-degree black belt.
Third degree,
and he did try. There are bruise marks and stuff. Like, there is evidence of him fighting back. So it's interesting that OJ would add that detail. He's like, and then he jumped into to Jim Cotto, where he was. He did a backflip.
I love that OJ, despite the brain damage, is still very familiar with the different karate styles.
He was doing Jeet Kune Do, which was something that I had.
My sensei said, I'm not properly trained to fight against that. And so OJ was nervous.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah.
So let's jump into some of this research. You brought it up earlier, and I think it is the most sort of outstanding potential other story that might exist for who murdered Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. But Jason Simpson, age 24 at the time, is the prime other suspect that was never actually looked into for the murder trial. Tell me what you know.
So I know a bit about this just from internet research. There isn't much out there other than that. There's a book written by this guy that I've not read, and it is OJ Simpson is innocent and I can prove it or something like that.
Yeah, William C. Deere is this guy who basically writes an entire book basically saying that OJ is innocent and I can prove it, where he explores all the reasoning and logic for Jason being the actual murderer.
But I do, again, think that is a flawed title because he says OJ is innocent. And I don't think that's... I do think he's probably an accessory. He's probably, at the very least, was at the crime scene. So... yeah, stuff I know about Jason. I know that he had a diagnosed rage disorder.
That's right. 100%.
And it was something that I guess has been described colloquially as Dr. Jekyll or Jekyll and Hyde disorder or something.
That's right. So it's called intermittent rage disorder, which I had never heard of. And yes, colloquially, it's Jekyll and Hyde syndrome. And he was given a drug called Depakote to control his rage and seizures. Apparently, it's so intense that he can go into seizures from it.
Interesting.
And that drug that he was taking, he stopped taking 2 months before the murders took place.
So, also, in that 2-month period, he was on probation or something for threatening his boss with a knife. And now he was a chef. So he was a chef, proficient in knives. He had a knife set, and he threatened his boss with a knife. In the past, he stabbed himself in front of his girlfriend. In an episode, he threatened another person with, he has multiple verified on the record instances where he threatened people with knives.
Yes, and not only threatened his girlfriend, he nearly killed her with it. Was fully attempting to stab her to death with a knife, and seriously injured other people with knives in the past. So he is not unfamiliar with knives. And even more so, a former roommate or classmate rather of Jason said that he was actually trained in hand-to-hand combat as well as field knife training when he attended the Army and Navy Academy. So this is a motherfucker that knows
he
knives
was a knife
front to
guy.
back.
I mean, it's crazy. That's what's so crazy about the incompetence here is that, if any of this is true, which, I've only done internet research, so it's what am I verifying, really? It just seems like it's been corroborated a bunch, and it's in this book. The fact that the police didn't even, do a cursory investigation, the fact that we don't all know this person's name as a suspect before, it's insane. The other things you find out are there was a hat found at the scene.
Yes.
With blood and hair. I believe hair from a dog as well. And OJ didn't wear hats, but there's a picture of Jason Simpson with a black hat of the same style with a dog on his bed.
Yeah, not only is it that they find the hat, but they find hair in the hat that, yes, belongs to a dog, but then also belongs to someone who isn't OJ.
Yeah.
and there are multiple pictures, not just one, but I know the exact one you're referring to, but there are multiple pictures of Jason Simpson wearing a similar style hat.
Right. Bunch of different colors, right?
Hanging out in the hat, like in indoor settings. This motherfucker loved that hat.
Yeah, so it's crazy. And another part of it is like, I think that like they found tons of fingerprints. They found tons of physical evidence that did not match OJ.
Yes.
The DNA under Nicole's fingernails did not match OJ. I believe we ultimately were like, oh, it was forensic mistakes or whatever. I think like they end up saying in a bunch of this stuff, but it's like, it just didn't match. And it could very well have been, Jason's. It very well could have been his Bruno Mali's. It very well could have been his gloves. It very well could have been all of it.
Yes. And to your point, the Charlie of it all, the Charlie that OJ refers to in his book and in the interview is often attributed or rather connected to be him protecting his son by giving him a sort of like pseudonym instead of just calling him Jason.
I didn't really know the guy. I mean, I raised him for a couple years, but we were distant. Me and
he
Charlie.
wasn't my favorite son,
so it's also like, so he was from a previous marriage, and there are rumors that he had this weird relationship with Nicole that was like a weird obsessive relationship. And apparently on the night he was supposed to come to the restaurant he worked at, but ended up not going to that restaurant and going to a different one. I guess the one that Ron Goldman worked at.
Yes, so Nicole was apparently and some allegedly scheduled to come and eat at the restaurant where Jason was working, despite having threatened his boss with a knife. He was still working at that restaurant, or at least a restaurant. And she didn't show up. She went to the restaurant where Ron Goldman was working. And thus, Jason, in theory, went into a fit of rage that drove him to go to her house. And so part of the argument that people have about the fact that Jason might be the killer is that the murders took place between 9:45 p.m. and 10:05 p.m. And after 9:50 p.m., Jason has no alibi that can support where he was during the period of the killing.
He apparently lied and said he was with his girlfriend, but he had to change that story. And he had a time card at the job he worked at that was like automated, but that night he wrote in the time.
Yeah.
Which is like kind of,
the time clock is working. Everybody else punches in their time, through the machine. But Jason handwrites his, and he also puts a little note where he's like, "I'm about to go kill a bitch." And
he was like, and specifically my stepmom. Like, it is all this evidence, and then there was apparently some other evidence that like there was a knife that they found in a locker that like actually matched better with the knives that they tried to say that OJ used. But I feel like if they found that knife, this dude would be in jail. So I don't know if I believe that one quite.
And okay, I'm glad you're saying this, because this is the hard part about all of this evidence, is that it's mostly coming from a one dude in his book.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes it this complicated thing of how legitimate we can believe this person to be. And so then, yes, to your point, they find a knife in a locker, in a basically like a storage locker that Jason had, that not only matches the description and size of the knife that was apparently used on Nicole and Ron, but on top of that has a number of like dent marks and sort of scratches on it that seem similar to the dent marks that were put on Nicole's head when he was using it like the blunt side of the knife to hit her.
That's insane.
But again, it's one dude.
If they had, it's a dude who's trying to sell a book, so it's like hard for me. I mean, he's not the only one to come out with this theory, and I know that like there are other pieces of evidence that I do feel like you could probably verify. Like I know that there's a lot of evidence that like OJ immediately hired a lawyer for his son after the next day. Yeah.
So he hires, like literally the next day, OJ hires a pretty famous criminal attorney, Carl Jones, to represent Jason, even though his son was never a suspect in the crime.
So I
and
feel
despite that,
yeah.
the LAPD was never like, hey, that's weird.
We don't have to talk to him. He's getting a lawyer. But to me, it's like if this guy was going to put that in the book, I feel like this lawyer would immediately dispute that if that weren't true. You know what I mean? Like there are parts of it where you're like, okay, he's making some claims that are pretty large. Also, another really interesting piece. Like, so I put up this Zoom background, and I've been sort of obsessed with the moment my entire life.
Yeah.
Of that reading of the verdict.
Mm-hmm.
I used to have this podcast back in New York that I used to do, and I used to weirdly just like play part of it, like as a drop. The people
okay.
Like
now we're being a little more clear about why you felt bad. You were being a real sicko about it.
Well, not even the not guilty part. I just love the like whole the tension that is built in that woman's voice when she starts saying everything, and then the little stumble that she has. Those are my favorite.
Right?
Parts.
She mispronounces Orenthal, and
that's
Orenthal. That's kind of fun.
It
you
is
can tell
fun.
This is a big moment for her, and she's just trying to show up.
But I think that moment is especially because of the phenomenon of this whole thing being on camera. I think it's one of the most interesting pieces of video of all time, because you get OJ's reaction, which is so puzzling because you don't know what his headspace is. You really don't know if he did it or not. At the time.
He almost seems like he doesn't understand what they said.
It's so puzzling. Like he has the most puzzling reaction, and then his little smile comes out. Like it's fascinating. Then they cut to, but even in that same shot, you see Cochran, a person being like, "I just won the most unwinnable case." Like, I cannot believe I won that. You're watching a person who is like. Cochran is like Jordan, like fever game. Like he's like feeling like the rush of energy of like, I didn't really have much at stake here other than the biggest win of my life. And and then you kind of are also seeing Darden and Marsha Clark's disappointment. Then you start going into the gallery where you see the Goldman family just like catatonic, like really, really
fully
sad.
Melting down. Yeah.
It's just such an interesting study of reactions, this whole thing. But then you go to the Simpson family, and his daughters are weeping, and his son has the strangest reaction. Like,
he doesn't.
He's like mad, stone faced.
Yeah.
It is so strange.
He doesn't give anything for a while. He just kind of sits there while everyone around him is either weeping in joy or relief.
Celebrating and
celebrating,
hugging each other.
He just kind of sits there as they reach around him to high five each other.
It is so puzzling. And then, the Goldman family is just audibly, they're now the loudest thing in the courtroom. And then you cut to him again, and his hands are in he's now just completely crying. And in the context of everything we know or think, it just seems like a person who's like, wow, I put my family through so much shit. I am the one who should really be up there. I feel guilty about this. If you can watch this reaction, it is, I don't know what to make of it.
It's not what I would have suspected my reaction would have been.
It's not
as
relief.
A person with the relief doesn't seem to exist, and the only real outward reaction seems to come more at the cries from the family, the other family, even more than his own family and salvation and whatever.
I can't. So not only is this a crazy conspiracy, but just from a story perspective, it is so fascinating because it's this shitty person covering for his maybe unwell son. But in a way, OJ's like, I didn't do it, so I should get off. And that might be part of OJ's reaction, is that he's expecting to get off. Like, I don't know. It's such a complicated video. It's so good.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things where it's like, even if OJ didn't do it, the type of smile that you see out of him feels almost too celebratory
It's
in a
very
way. It's all very weird.
It's so
There's
weird.
a few more pieces of evidence that I'd
Yes.
love to dig into.
Mhm.
One of the things that they point to, along with his disorder, is that in terms of his mental health, at least, is that Jason apparently abused alcohol, ecstasy, and cocaine, beginning at the age of 14. And police reports indicate that he was arrested at least 4 times, including a DUI, driving with a suspended license, and assault with a deadly weapon, while medical records reveal at least 3 suicide attempts.
Yes,
So
there were definitely suicide attempts that I'd heard.
to your point, this wasn't necessarily a person in their most healthy mental state from the beginning of all of this.
Going through a medication change, which is maybe something that could be verifiable as well, but it all is so once the story plays out in the way that if justice were served, ultimately this person is in a facility that is trying to like help him, you know?
Yeah,
and like OJ's not this completely fucked up monster. Like OJ's life is completely fucked up. And maybe it should have been because he was already a piece of shit, but like they had divorced and they weren't together, you know? And I don't think there's been any other, God, I don't even know. But it's a fascinating alternate reality.
I think the justice that should have been served should have come along the times where he was being a domestic abuser, where he was like being a scumbag in all of the ways that he was a scumbag, and not necessarily for the thing that ultimately we know him best for, which is murder.
Well, that is also the big part of it, is the celebrity of this is a huge piece to the story, because he had this weird privilege in LA that like a lot of people didn't. And it's just funny that that magnet of celebrity also was what made them want to pin it on him. Yeah. And also is the thing that probably shaded any investigation into his son. Like if this was just any dude off the street, the son would have been the prime suspect.
Yeah, you check all the pieces, but instead it's OJ, and we've decided it's going to be OJ, and therefore we are only going to investigate ways to make OJ the prime suspect. Okay, here's the last piece of evidence that I'll throw at you that I had never heard this, but I think is hugely fascinating. Apparently Jason used to write these notes, these little diary notes to himself that he titled Dear Jason, and in it there's all kinds of mentions of like his rage, and sort of like at certain points he writes about being 3 people, and handwriting experts have basically connected this back to Jason Simpson, although it's not necessarily definitive that Jason Simpson was the one that wrote this. But in it, one of the most important sections, he says, "It's the year of the knife for me. I cut away my problems with a knife. Anybody touches my friends, I will kill them. I'm also tired of being Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde."
Yeah, I mean, that is so crazy. I mean, I am very, very saddened by and also one of the things I heard is that like he's nowhere to be found now. Like people don't know where he is.
Yeah, he there are some accounts, I kept trying to figure it out, and there are some accounts that say he's like living a quote unquote quiet life in Atlanta, still working at like restaurants, but I don't know how verifiable that is. I think most people are kind of like, yeah, he just disappeared, and nobody really knows where Jason Simpson is at this point.
I wouldn't be surprised if he changed his name. He's going by Charlie now. He's just like, fuck it. Just call me Charlie. I mean,
I would love it if this family is so dumb that they just collectively are like, all right, what did OJ write in the book? You Charlie now.
Well, I guess I'm Charlie. I mean, look, here's the thing that is, because the worst part about all of this, and I think the underlying conspiracy theory that like I will always believe, and like I feel like my family is always going to believe, is that like the cops are dirty as fuck. Like, they're dirty and bad. Like, and
let me stop you right there.
Please,
That's how they get you.
That's how they get you.
That's how they get you.
That ultimately is the entire point of all of this. OJ Simpson very well could be the murderer that we suspect he was. But the cops did such a poor job in this process that you could not definitively prove he's a murderer, and therefore, unfortunately, should be allowed to go free after this trial.
I am a person who, I used to love conspiracy theories. Like, I would be talking to you about any bullshit, like any bad one, any good one. Like, I really do like conspiracies, but as I've gotten older, I've like seen that like they can be somewhat harmful and some of them are kind of dumb. But the one that I will always believe, I will always just be like, yes, is any conspiracy involving the police. Yep. And that I was a huge fan of this really downer person, I will say. The whole story is a very much downer, but he was an incredible human. This guy, Michael Rupert. Have you ever heard of him?
I haven't.
Okay,
Tell me
so
more.
Michael Rupert, if you're a conspiracy podcast guy, you got to know about Michael Rupert. He was the cop who basically exposed the CIA for approaching him to sell drugs in inner cities in Los Angeles. There's videos of him. There's videos of him confronting members of the CIA in open hearings. He has this incredible story. Like, if you guys want to watch an incredible YouTube video, look up Michael Rupert CIA. He's like a young cop being like, I was approached by blank, blank, blank. I have these clearances because of my
he's
family.
Like naming names and shit.
He doesn't, I don't know if he names them there, but he's like, please contact me. We need to talk about this. The guy's like, let's talk about it. He exposed the police in selling drugs in the CIA, Iran-Contra. Like, all of that shit is Michael. Like, go to Michael Rupert and look up that old shit. And in his later years, because of his like sort of whistleblower attitude, he sort of had to move around the world a bunch because he started exposing. He's a big person that talked about like peak oil. He's talked about like the collapse of the banks. He kind of predicted 2008 before it happened. There's a documentary called Collapse where he basically sits in a chair. It's a documentary where the man sits in a chair, chain smokes cigarettes, and talks about how peak oil is going to fuck us up. And it is really, really good. Yeah. But because of this CIA thing, and I remember learning this a long time ago, especially after that KRS-One fucking, whatever. There's a whole song with KRS-One where they're talking about the CIA selling drugs in the inner city. I was like, what is this? Yeah. And when you look it up, it's this guy. So anything about the police, I'm just like, I absolutely believe it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There's so much evidence and so much history of the police intentionally doing fuck shit to black, brown, impoverished people. And sometimes just because that's part of what they're trained to do. It isn't even just like a personal vendetta. It's like, this is like part of the system that we're built on.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I think like, from hearing that when I was young and hearing shit now, like, yeah, all the police unions are run by the mob and all this, and it's all a criminal organization and all this shit. I will believe any police conspiracy because they all end up being kind of true. Like, that much of a stretch.
I think we can both agree. Fuck the police.
I guess that is what I'm saying.
All right, we're going to take one more break. We'll be back with more Shaun Diston and more My Mama Told Me. And we are back.
We're not going to let Joe Biden and Kamala Harris cut America's meat.
That's that on that. That's that on that.
Yeah, we're back here with more Shaun Diston. More My Mama Told Me. We're still talking about the conspiracy that Jason Simpson is in fact the real murderer and the police are the real pieces of the shit in this whole scenario. I have a fun game that I would love to play with you right now. Okay. This game, it's a brand new game that I'm calling If They Did It.
You must be loco to mess with us. Don't you know we're dangerous? We'll kill you. We'll kill you.
Interesting.
If They Did It is the
Okay.
name of this game, and it's a
Okay.
very simple game. All I'm going to do is introduce to you a few alternative theories that I had never heard before in my life about what potentially could have happened during this murder. And what I would love for you to do is just unpack them. You're a man who or at least used to love conspiracy theories when you were more irresponsible. So just unpack them. Let's hear your thoughts on some of these,
All right,
these
throw 'em at me.
conspiracy
Throw
theories.
me some.
Great. My first one, and this one is very interesting to me on a number of levels, but one of the things that they point to is that apparently Nicole Brown Simpson had a drug problem, that she was in some ways in debt to a number of drug dealers, and that the murder of her and Ron Goldman was a hit for money that she owed on her, I guess, cocaine purchases. I don't know.
Now, this is this was a theory that was up and around when the trial was going on. Like, it was a drug thing. It was a drug thing. And I feel like that is kind of one of those theories that gets thrown around, like, after a lot of murder. Like, I even feel like after the Manson murders, people are like, this was a drug thing. Like, actually, if you go into it, it was a drug thing. I think it was too sloppy to be a drug hit. Like, why are you going in there with one knife? Why are you going in there? Like, I just feel like that's too sloppy.
Yeah, I agree. There's something weird about, like, if this is in fact like this major cartel, like, trying to seek vengeance, you don't send one dude who can get beat up by a man named Ron Goldman.
Yeah, I don't think so. And I also think, like, the part of, I think, what gave that conspiracy some credence, I think, at least in Florida, was that there were rumors that the kids were now selling drugs after the trial. Like, so it was just like, were drugs always a part of the picture? But I don't know. To me, it feels like you go in there, you have a gun or something, and what are they selling drugs? How much money could they owe? I think another weird fucked up thing that I remember hearing was like something about like a Colombian necktie, where they're like, that's where you like slit the throat and pull their tongue. It's like that shit is not happening in Brentwood, man. Like, that is so risky and stupid. Yeah. So I do not think it was a drug thing.
Yeah, they're not sending a message to all these people with 3 pools.
No,
they're
I don't think, that old white lady in the slippers next door need to know what's up.
You're next, Bernice.
I don't think
I don't think that's the energy that the cartel is showing up with. Here's a sillier, I don't know if sillier is the right word, but certainly a more absurd one. There's a theory that OJ hired a serial killer to murder his ex-wife and Ron Goldman, a man named Glenn Rogers.
Interesting.
Who basically claims to have killed 70 women, including Nicole Brown Simpson, is apparently hired by OJ and is in fact the murderer. And it's even verified. The brother of Glenn Rogers basically claims he genuinely believes that his brother was in fact the person who did the murders.
Interesting. See, I'd never heard that. I had maybe heard that, like, it looked like it could have been a serial killer, the murder, you know, like there was a sadisticness to it, which I think you attribute to either someone, you know, like a passion crime, or a serial killer.
Yep.
I think there was also some theory going around when I was younger that, like, OJ tried to make it look like it was a serial killer or something. So it's interesting that there's an actual person that they've attributed it to. I would say that is not a terrible idea for, like, like, not to say that we should do that, but, like, if you were, like, writing a movie, like, that's
I love that you were sitting there like, honestly,
I mean,
I'm
like,
liking what OJ's doing
because
here.
Like, if this was like a movie, right, you could be like, it's the perfect crime because ultimately if you get caught, which you want to get caught as a serial killer, like, you'll just be like, it was a random killing, you know. You find, do you hunt down a serial killer only to have him kill someone in your life? That's not a bad idea. Like,
that's the part that I think bumped me pretty hard in all of this. Is like, what did OJ look up to find local serial killers in his area that could take care of his ex-wife for him?
Let me ask around. You guys know, hey, I'm OJ. You guys know these serial killers?
Hey, Rob Kardashian, you know any serial killers nearby?
It would have to be some sort of, like when OJ was in jail, met someone, you know what I mean? And like, because he's OJ,
Sure.
they're like, oh my God, it's OJ. I love you. Like, you love me, huh? You want to do something for me? Like,
I kill people because of you.
But
What's up, OJ?
But I would say this, Langston. Okay, you are an actor. If we wrote a movie that was like, dude who wants to like kill his boss, and he's like a detective, so he hunts down a serial killer and corners him, and the serial killer's, what are you gonna do? You arrest me? He's like, no, I got a job for you. Then he gets his boss. Man, this is pretty good.
It's pretty
We
good.
got to edit
I'm
that
not
shit
gonna
out.
lie.
We have to edit that shit out.
I'm intrigued. You got my ear. I want to develop this
With OJ. Let's get
with
OJ.
OJ. We got to take him into the pitches, and he's got to talk about the Buffalo Bills.
Well,
for
here's what's
half
going
the
on with the
time.
Buffalo Bills. If you're gonna run the ball, you got to have a passing game. All right, man. What does that mean? You got to commit to running the ball.
Here's another phenomenal. This is a much more absurd one. There are some people who contend that OJ was the victim of mind control in murdering his wife. That basically the CIA, the FBI, the Illuminati all sort of team up and start running mind control experiments on OJ, ultimately to sort of like increase or bring a head to the racial tension that is building already in America. That this is like a chess move, that if OJ kills his wife, we are able to, I guess, solve race? I don't know what the
I will
goal
say
is.
that is the type of shit I would have been like 10 years ago. I would have, like 12 years ago, I would be like, okay. So let me look it up. So like, who would benefit from this? Like, what companies? That's an interesting one. And like, unfortunately, the mind control might just be like he played in the NFL and like knocked his head around for however many years, you know, ran right up the middle. Like, I feel like that is where the mind control comes in. But that's a fascinating one. I did, you know, I used to think about the Illuminati all the time in Bohemian Grove and the Bilderberg meetings and all this shit. And like, I don't know what they're doing, but how many things do you have to do before you get to, all right, well, now let's frame OJ for a murder so that we can bring racial tensions? Like, they're probably just like, you know, like stealing oil from the Middle East or whatever. Like, I think there's better shit to be doing than that.
To your point, that's not that wasn't in a single meeting where y'all just sat down. This got pitched out and everybody was like, cool.
They're like, all right, let's get to point 135. Okay, let's see. You guys know OJ? No? Let's watch Naked Gun.
Have you heard of OJ?
Let's watch
OJ
Naked
Simpson?
Gun real quick. Yeah.
There's a similar one that also claims that an Aryan cult might have, and not in under mind control, but an Aryan cult actually was the group that murdered Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, not for the sake of sort of fixing race in America, but actually inciting the racial tension in America, that they wanted to set up
It was
OJ.
a frame. They were framing him to be like, okay, this is, and you know what? Like, I could see how that conspiracy develops because, like I said, after the trial, especially for like young kids and like people who were maybe just like had a cursory understanding of what was going on, there was this like, all right, cool, black people, like we did get, like there was a weird racial line drawn, and because obviously the trial goes way into it and like the crooked cop shit and the N-word and all that shit, like it all ends up being a part of the case. So it's, but I don't know if you could have predicted the Mark Furman of it all.
Yeah.
Like he could have just rolled with his original attorney and just been like, cop a plea or whatever. The Mark Furman and the Johnny Cochran of it all are very, very, those are wild cards that I don't know if anyone could have predicted.
No, I don't think that anyone anticipated. I mean, clearly OJ didn't even anticipate it because he didn't hire
he
Johnny
didn't even
Cochran
want
in
it.
the
He was like,
beginning.
well, this ain't a race thing. He's like, it's always a race thing. OJ.
Come on, brother, wake up. It is a race thing.
Courtney B.
My
Vance,
favorite.
I gotta say, guys, like, again, I'm gonna plug it again. If you have not watched The People versus OJ Simpson, I've said this many times, but that is my Star Wars. Like, when the Bronco shows up on screen, I was like, oh, like the Bronco, they got a Bronco. Oh my God. Like I was like, oh my God, who's going to be Kim? I was just obsessed with it.
I love the idea that like Star Wars, you're dressing up before every episode.
I'm
You're
like
just
dressed up like
sitting-
AC. I'm like sitting in the front. I'm like, this is cool. I'm driving people around. It is so good, that series, and I do think it goes into some of the trial. Like, it really paints the picture that OJ did it, which I don't necessarily agree with 100%, but they really do a great job in showing how bad the cops were and how race played into this, and how ultimately they tried to frame him, whether he did it or not, or his son was involved. And it's so good and well acted. And Courtney B. Vance and like fucking Darden and Marsha Clark are so good in it.
Yeah. I'll give you one last alternative theory, and this one actually is my favorite. And you've brought it up once or twice already, but I think it's worth digging into a little. One of the arguments that I read on the internet that people make for OJ being innocent of the crime, not in fact a murderer, is the brain damage that he suffered from professional football. That the CTE somehow exempts him from the crimes that he committed.
Well, it's if you watch the really, really sad Aaron Hernandez documentary, it really makes you want to look at everybody's brain, like the Junior Seau of it all. Like, there's a lot of really fucked up shit going on.
Sure.
And I don't think it makes him innocent.
I was about to say,
like,
where does innocence come into that? Because sad, 100%.
I ultimately think, like, for justice to be served on that, like, we have to figure out a way to, one, look, I hate the NFL. I don't like that league at all. But we have to figure out a way to protect those players, and we have to figure out a way to treat them after they play. Because if not, you're going to have a lot of very young, almost going broke, extremely dangerous individuals that are like, that are unwell because of, like, I think it happens in soccer in Europe, and it happens in football out here. And it's like, you got to be careful with those head injuries, man. Like that.
Right. You
crazy.
Trained a dude for 5 to 10 years to lift 400 pounds over his head. And then afterwards, you left him with zero money and zero accountability. So, he's probably going to act a nut.
Tons of scarring in his brain. Like, it is really sad what happens to those players in the NFL. And I feel like it's such a grinding. And look, OJ came from a time where you could get rich. Like, he was one of the lucky ones. Like, he had a career after the NFL. Commercials, everything. So even then, I do think that and look, all the stuff that we know he did, the abusing of Nicole, the like incidents of rage in the hotel room and on the streets of Miami, like that shit I can attribute to CTE. Is he not guilty? That dude is still very guilty of that stuff. But it is a sad circumstance for sure.
And I think to your earlier point, the hope would be that we figure out a way, because I think the only way to check for CTE right now is for you to, you have to be dead and like pull the brain apart.
Which is so sad. They got to figure out a way to find that in some sort of manner.
To figure out a way to track it early, and then to your point, get people the help that they need, even if, they have committed crimes, ultimately getting them into some kind of service where they can be held accountable, but also get better from whatever this shit is the goal.
Here's what they got to do. Get rid of helmets in the NFL. Like, no lie. If there are no helmets, look at these rugby dudes. They're not getting the same injuries because they're not taking the same risks.
Yeah, I'm not going skull to skull just off
diving
of like
missile head first. Like,
I just really want the Washington football team to win. No,
I can't. It's very upsetting to me. But
absolutely,
is that a conspiracy? I don't think so. Like, I think it's probably just, you might as well assume OJ had it. The amount of miles on him as a running back and the amount of the load he took and the way he ran.
Sure, I think the conspiracy was more of
once you have it, you're kind of like free to do whatever you want.
Yeah, it's like a get out of jail free card. It's like no, I earned my brain damage.
No, the get out of jail free card was that he was famous and rich.
There it is. We did it, Shaun. This was a fantastic time.
Yeah.
I'm so happy you did it. Could you tell the people where they could find you, any cool stuff you
Yeah,
have
just
going
check out my Patreon at patreon.com/Shaun Diston. I'm, like you mentioned, I'm doing this Ninja Turtles podcast where we talk about all the Ninja Turtles movies with Scott Aukerman, and it's real fun. There's other improv on there and a lot of other fun stuff coming. And yeah, look out for some. God, there's some shows coming out, but I don't even know when, so I can't really promote them. But there's some stuff on the horizon, so just check it out.
Okay, hell yeah. And as always, you can follow me at Langston Kerman. And please, if you have drops, if you have conspiracies of your own, if you have voicemails you would like to send us, please leave them all at mymommapod@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Otherwise, I don't know. Bye.